into the windup in his first offering. Just a bit outside.
Are you crying? Are you crying? There's no crying. There's no crying in baseball.
Little roller up along first. Behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit.
Flutie takes the snap. He drops straight back. Has some time. Now scrambles away from one hit. Looks. Uncorks a deep one for the end zone. Phelan is down there. Oh, he got it! He got it! He got it! Touchdown! 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 Boston College! He did it! He did it! Flutie did it!
Well, I believe in the soul. The small of a woman's back. The hanging curveball, high fiber, good scotch, that the novels of Susan Sontag are self-indulgent, overrated crap. I believe Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. I believe there ought to be a constitutional amendment outlawing AstroTurf and the designated hitter. I believe in the sweet spot, softcore pornography, opening your presents Christmas morning rather than Christmas Eve, and I believe in long, slow, deep, soft, wet kisses that last 3 days. Good night.
A report from USA Today uncovered an investigation about Les Miles' time at LSU and alleged inappropriate conduct with female students. We've got team coverage on this story tonight. Betsy Webster is in Lawrence getting reaction from students. But we begin with Danny Welniak in the locker room. So, Danny, what's in this report and what is KU saying tonight?
Well, Brad, KU Athletics says it is aware of the article published by USA Today and just today has been made aware of that report from 2013. The article quotes an internal investigation that was done by a law firm hired by LSU. That 2013 report did not suggest any sexual relationships between Miles and female students, but did call his actions, quote, inappropriate. The allegations include texting with female students, making them feel uncomfortable, and kissing a student, then suggesting they go to a hotel together. The article says LSU issued a reprimand and banned Miles from having contact with female students. Miles strongly denies kissing a student and says he was simply mentoring young women. The report ultimately concluded that there were no or was not any legal cause to discipline or terminate Miles' contract. When KCTV5 reached out to KU today, a spokesperson released a statement saying that KU was not provided a copy of the report prior to its publication in USA Today. We are in the process of reviewing the 34-page document.
Everything old is new again. Or as someone once said, I think I've said it many times, wash, rinse, repeat. Because that's exactly the way things are in college athletics, specifically college football. When it comes down to the breaking of rules, coaches who take issue with rules, coaches, players who basically decide what they want to do, when they want to do it, and administrations who basically let them get away with it. What's happened at LSU, what's happening at the University of Kansas is really nothing new, but we have to ask ourselves, why does it continue to go on? Have we not been here before? Well, we haven't been right here before, so we will for the first time. Hi once again, everybody. I'm Ed Berliner. Thanks for joining us and welcome into a special edition of The Man in the Arena, the Sports Reporters. When it came down to college football, I only thought of one person I wanted to talk to about this because he has been nice enough and friendly enough and a colleague enough over the years to appear on many of my radio shows, my TV shows. I mean, goodness, we go back at least years because, hell, nobody's going to talk about how many years ago it was. But it was fun. He is knowledgeable. I really don't turn to anybody else. You've read him in Sports Illustrated. You've read him and seen him on ESPN over the years. Quite frankly, he just knows it all. And I like to be able to say that. It's a pleasure to welcome in Ivan Maisel to The Man in the Arena and the Sports Reporters. Ivan, how have you been, my friend?
Good, Ed. Gosh, I feel old now. Thanks a lot for that.
Well, I kind of had to give it because if you think about it, I think you first were a guest on a radio show of mine, maybe early 90s, maybe some late 80s, somewhere in there.
Yeah, when the height of the U, sure.
The height of the U, when that's all anybody ever talked about was the University of Miami. And now, of course, people talk about the University of Miami just...
Yeah.
They don't want to talk about it right now because it's going to be a long way back up. So anyway, it's great to see you again, and I'm so looking forward to this because when the Les Miles story hit, it was the first thing that jumped into my mind. We have been here before. We have been here for decades. And to me, Ivan, it is nothing more than a cover-up from top to bottom. Why are we still here? And why can no one seem to understand that at the end of the day, it is administrations covering up for coaches, coaches covering up for players, and in many ways, we are dealing in criminal activity?
Well, it's interesting, Ed. I mean, a problem like this, a scandal like this, is we see it repeated over and over again in all walks of life. I mean, look at the issues with Governor Cuomo in New York now, and human nature is human nature. The difference is, I think, is society takes it a lot more seriously now. That the attitude that a generation ago was just, well, that's how men act, and women just have to suffer it, and we don't do that anymore, and that's to the good. And I think a guy like Les Miles came up under one set of rules, and the rules changed, and he didn't change with them, and evidently the administration at LSU didn't change with them either. I mean, that is really incredibly embarrassing for LSU, and I blame them a lot more than I blame the guys at KU, the administrators at KU. I don't know how they could have known this when LSU didn't release the report or didn't act upon it.
You brought up two things in there, so let's take that first of all from the LSU side of things and the overall instance itself, what we're dealing with here. When you say that, and it is true, because, and you used a great example, Governor Cuomo in New York, and other instances, Harvey Weinstein, so many others, where there simply is the desire to act immediately on this and not let people get away with this kind of activity. However, they are getting away with it. So where's the cross, I guess, there, where we want to say to ourselves that society and overall, in general, people don't want to put up with this anymore. We want to stop this. Yet we allow it. There is, from the administrators, and we'll get to the fans in a minute, who just seem to, they look the other way. They don't want to know.
Yeah. Well, sure. Winning cures a lot of ills. It always has in sports, and especially in college sports. And Les Miles was winning a lot at LSU, and evidently he was winning enough that even the recommendation of AD Joe Oliva that they fire him was just ignored. And I think that speaks to not only the power of winning, but the power of alumni, and to well, if you do that, then you can say goodbye to my wallet. And I don't have direct evidence of that at LSU, but I don't know how else you explain the ability to overlook what he had done, what Les Miles had done. And it's that, you're right, that part doesn't change. It doesn't seem to change. And but I think to me, we're in a much better place than we used to be, because we are much more appalled by this sort of thing now than we were a generation ago.
But when you look at that, and I will agree with you in many senses that we seem to be appalled. But isn't it phony? I mean, really, we seem to be, oh my goodness, shock, oh, terrible. It's phony. It's a lie, because on the surface, people will say that. But, and again, you pointed to that, and let's dig into that. There will be boosters at LSU and at Kansas and at any one of the other schools who will say, this is terrible, we have to stop this. It could be my daughters, it could be my sons. It's where I pay a lot of my money into. Oh, but wait a minute. We were in the playoff last year, so we got to let it go. It's a fraud. People are lying flat out.
Well, yeah, you're right. When that we all tend to look the other way when our coach wins, but I look at the overall picture and how the standards they seem to be changing. Chattanooga fired an assistant coach because he made a derogatory racial comment regarding Stacey Abrams in Georgia. I think we're a lot more cognizant of that sort of thing, and we don't look the other way. I think our standards are better. I think winning is still paramount, and winning is always going to be paramount to people in competitive affairs. So I don't quite have your, I'm not as shocked as you are, because I think people are responding better. But clearly something like this at LSU is appalling. And I think the fact that Kansas acted as swiftly as they did because of something that happened 7 years ago, 8 years ago, not at their school, is a illustration that we are taking it more seriously.
Does it seem to you sometimes, at least it sure does to me, Ivan, that there is more outrage if it's involved with a statement over race that is made because of a sexual innuendo is made, or if a sexual accusation is made, and you hate to say it out loud, even in the 21st century, but there are still those who will say, "Come on, honey." I'm going to use the phraseology here. "Come on, honey, that was 6 years ago. You should have said something by then." And yeah, come on, you're a pretty woman, you're a pretty girl. You just wanted it. I'm serious, and people are going to take that out of context, but I want them to understand the context. That is still what I hear to this day. From a sexual nature, you wanted it. It's no big deal. From a racial nature, how could you? That to me is frightening, that there's that kind of division.
I think we're better. We're better at taking that sort of issue regarding between the sexes. I think we've gotten better at it, and this is a great example. This is Les Miles. It did take Les Miles 7-8 years to get fired, but Kansas acted within a matter of days once they heard. Harvey Weinstein, to your example, is in prison for stuff that producers in Hollywood, in the middle of the 20th century did as a matter of course. So, I think that standard has improved. I would agree with you that we are a lot more sensitive and aware of racial issues and racial slights than we used to be, and
we should
be. Yeah, and again, what's not to like about that? I think the outcry at Texas over the song, the alma mater, the Eyes of Texas, has been really instructional, and to see. Because it's not black and white. It's not a black and white issue. I mean, there are just a lot of different aspects to it. Whether the song is racist and just if it had been written in a racist time, what does that mean for the generations who sang it and never had a racist thought, when they sang it? I mean, that to me is kind of second level thinking, and that Texas has been forced to do, and it's fascinating.
From the educational side of things, LSU specifically now, because of what's happened, do you honestly think, Ivan, that they will learn from this? And I say that by pointing out that LSU has a long history of players who have broken rules, broken laws, of different issues regarding coaches. This isn't as if it's, to use the phrase, their first rodeo. So will they learn anything from this? Why should we expect that they would learn anything from this when they haven't learned a damn thing from the past?
Well, I would agree with you. And I think that comes down to the leadership. It's not. It doesn't happen just because it's an SEC school. It doesn't happen just because it's at LSU. I mean, It's the people who are in charge of that particular institution at that time and what they tolerate. You know, Nick Saban might be dictatorial, but you see a lot less. They have a lot fewer problems at Alabama than they do at LSU. They're both in the SEC. They both want to win really badly. But I think the administration at Alabama, Nick Saban, Greg Byrne, up to Stuart Bell, the president, they just seem to pay more attention to that stuff than, and then you look at LSU and it's just been an utter disaster. I don't know how you can have a campus that size and have 2 Title IX officials on a campus of that size with that many students, over 30,000. I mean, that's nobody in the athletic department knew who the Title IX people were, and you can not take Title IX seriously all you want. You can ridicule it all you want. You can make fun of women's sports if you want, but that's the law. It's something you have to do.
Well, then that comes right to the phrase I used starting out the show. This is a cover-up. LSU is without question involved in a cover-up. They're covering up for their coach. They're covering up for their program. They're covering up for assistants and players. This is a crime in many ways. If you have someone who is involved in a sexual assault and you have somebody else who's covering up, and again, I'm not a lawyer nor a policeman, I just play one on TV, but it sure seems to me like if you've got somebody sitting there, then you're dealing in a crime. And these are crimes that have gone on for a long time. So it still leads us to that. Why has nothing changed, Ivan? Why? It's right out there in front of us. Yet it's the same wash, rinse, repeat every couple of years.
I think it's obviously it's a cover-up. They commission the report and then they put it in a file cabinet for this number, this long a time. Thank goodness that there are laws that could compel them to produce it. I think, to your point, I think you're dealing with base human emotions, and base human desires. People want to win, and sometimes
and base human bank accounts.
Yeah, people want to win, and they want to make money, and I think those motivations have been a great source of good and a great source of ill for as far back as you care to go, and in that sense that's not changed. But I do believe we're a lot more sensitive overall as a society to this sort of thing, and we're a lot more outraged by it than we used to be, and I think that's a good thing.
I'm going to ask this question, and I already know the answer, but but I have to throw it out there. Why do college football fans not give one single damn what happens when a coach or a player breaks the rules, breaks the laws, whether it be a simple law of getting one too many meals or taking liberties with a young female?
Well, I think in regard to NCAA regulations, the NCAA has done a masterful job over certainly the course of my 40 years in journalism of shooting itself in the foot and not making the rules easy to follow and not having the rules follow common sense. And
you just did. You really just broke a major rule here. You put the words NCAA and common sense in the same sentence. You realize it?
Yes, but opposite of one another. Yeah. So in that regard, the public has been conditioned to think that the NCAA rules are great until they are applied to their school. Which again, that gets back to what your motivation is. Is your motivation to win, or is it to play by the rules? So to me, that's been the biggest problem. I think as far as when student athletes break the law, I think people have a lot. I think there's less tolerance for that. But again, so often what happens when a young man or young woman gets in trouble on campus is we don't hear the whole story. You know, we get some of the story. And sometimes the coaches or the athletic administration or whoever on campus knows more, but they can't or won't release it to the public. And then when it turns out that the student athlete in question gets off, people go, well, God, they covered up for him, or they didn't prosecute him the way he should have been. Well, sometimes, we didn't know all the facts. I'm not diminishing the fact that there are plenty of kids whose bad actions get covered up. But again, I think there's a lot less tolerance for that than there used to be.
Ivan Maisel is our guest here on The Man in the Arena. For those of you listening to us on podcast, you can get a hold of him on Twitter at Ivan_Maisel. Facebook is @Ivan.Maisel, and Instagram is @Ivan_Maisel. I want to work off something that you just said. Is it possible in 2021 to win big in college football without breaking the rules?
Oh, well, of course not. I mean, not in the sense of, any rules. I mean, the NCAA rule book is a minefield in that regard. The major rules is where it gets interesting. And my guess is that everybody, I think you can make a pretty good case that there's honor among thieves, in coaching. Not across the board. But I think there has always been some sort of, if you turn me in, I'm going to turn you in thing. I can't give you any evidence for that. But that's just the feeling I've always had.
Well, I think you and I can pretty much agree on that because we've been around college athletics long enough to where, without naming names, which there'd be a hitman at the door any moment now, we could say that we've heard this, we know this. There's always that you turn me in, I'll turn you in mentality. It's always been the good old boy mentality. I mean, that's really nothing new in college athletics, in any sport for that matter. With regard to breaking those rules and regard to that monstrously thick NCAA rule book, which I think if it dropped from a level of 100 feet, I think you could dent a car to the ground with the size of that book and what it weighs. Is it not possible that a lot of this would simply go away magically, like the genie showed up, if they would just pay players a living wage in college football and stop with this dancing around about whether or not they're actual professionals and they help make a buck?
That's a great thought. I don't think the problems would go away. I think there would just be different problems. So much of the issue of compensating players gets down to making them employees of the university, and that seems to be a Pandora's box that nobody wants to open. And I don't know all the ins and outs of labor law, but it seems to have it's just not a subject that anyone wants to broach.
But do you think they're going to have to open that box sooner or later? I mean, it's kind of creaked a little bit over the years. It's kind of like, the lid's just been open a little bit, but eventually they're going to have to crank this thing open.
Well, I think it will be fascinating if they can ever figure out how to implement name, image, and likeness income and see how that goes, and get past the notion that every athlete has to get the same amount of compensation, which is what we have now with scholarships. If you have a scholarship, you get at this school, you get X, Y, and Z. I think name, image, and likeness, obviously that won't happen because, everybody has a different name, image, and likeness. So I think there are going to be a lot of surprises in who is able to take advantage name, image, and likeness and who isn't. I think there are going to be a lot of non-revenue student athletes that become very make a lot of money, either by swimmers putting on clinics, or a student athlete who's got a lot of talent online that is able to create something out of that. I mean, we're all going to be surprised at how this thing plays out. And I think that's a good interim step. The biggest issue I have with just flat paying them is how do you take into account what the value of the scholarship, and is that if we're just going to be flat employees, does the scholarship become taxable income? I've been out of paying tuition a couple of years now, and I still have the scars. I mean, it's a lot of money, and I've never quite understood why people continue to insist that student athletes don't get compensated. A college education can cost $250,000, $300,000 at some schools. That's a lot of money, and I'm fine with name, image, and likeness. I was kind of late to that party, but I get it, and I hope it works, and I can't wait to see how it's going to work. But they are getting something that has significant value.
Well, that's always been the argument that, it's been on since you and I have been covering athletics, is that when people will say you don't really need to get paid because you're getting a scholarship, you're getting food, you're getting board, you're getting the educators that are working with you, you're getting all this
medical
basically
care,
for free, dental care in some ways, medical care in some cases, but not full-blown medical care in many other cases. But there are those who would counter by saying, wait a minute, that's really all amortized into the school budget, because they have the teachers there anyway who are teaching other students. You have the medical care that's there for everybody else. You have the facilities that are there, and you're making a monstrous profit off these players. When the other side would say you're not making a monstrous profit off the chemical major, the engineering major that's working, that's getting his or her degree. So because the profit's coming into the school, then there is pay that needs to be had. See, it's really a dichotomous balance that goes in here that I don't know if there's a real answer to, but I think it's a fair argument on both sides.
No, I think the people that want to compensate players can make kids can make a really compelling argument. I would argue that the student athlete gets much more medical, athletic training, tutoring, and at a much higher level and much more intense level than the typical student.
Yes.
And if you're going to monetize everything, then the value of all that goes way over and above tuition, room, board.
But there it is. But okay, counter, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
The athletes are at a greater risk because they put their bodies out there, and if they get injured, their physical prowess is done. You don't see an education major doing that.
No, that's certainly true. They are at greater risk. But if you are injured to the point you can no longer play, you still get your education and you still get all that treatment, and as long as you're at that school. So it's I think the point that the proponents make that an oboe player can go in the student band can go make money playing music, and a student athlete can't go make money doing what he does or she does off campus it's hard to argue with that. And that's always been the sort of the flaw in the NCAA argument. And I think they're going to try to rectify it, and I think name, image, and likeness is a good place to start.
That comes down to money, of course. And there's two other issues here to discuss regarding money, which again, here we go. It's sort of the wash, rinse, repeat that we're still into in many ways, but they've sort of grown in many ways. First of all, I want to talk about the coaches themselves. We've talked about the players. Let's talk about coaches. coaches make incredibly insane, obscene amounts of money at major colleges.
Yes,
I
they
think
do.
last time I checked, I think Lou Saban's making $190 million plus. I think he has a piece of the
Nick
Mars
Saban,
rover, by the
yeah.
time it's done. But let's take this a step backward. It's not just college coaches that are being paid tremendous amounts of money. This begins in the high school level, which I don't think people are really well aware of here, Ivan. Because if you look at what they're getting, and this is a report from First Coast News in Jacksonville, and they cover southern Georgia. And this was a report from 2018. And get that, it's 2018, so we're talking 3 years ago. And listen to the amounts of money that are made here just to coach high school football.
High school football in the Peach State is big business. And Georgia coaches are proving to be the real winners.
There's no price you can put on winning.
But Georgia public schools can put a price on hiring the right coach. Proof? 36 football coaches make at least $100,000 a year.
I think the biggest surprise to me was how fast coaches' salaries are growing.
That is a 64% increase over 2 years, when a First Coast News On Your Side investigation found at least 22 coaches making six figures. Colquitt County's Rush Perost earned the most money last school year, $132,000. He doesn't teach any classes. Colquitt County school officials declined comment. Despite that, pay includes far more than just coaching. That's according to Glenn County Schools athletic director Steve Waters.
It's hard to pay enough to find a quality head coach, and certainly I think here in South Georgia we're setting the standard for that.
Coaches in Southeast Georgia making the big bucks include Ware County's Franklin Stevens, Flint Academy's Rocky Hidalgo, and Camden County's former coach Welton Coffey. But is it money well spent? Here in Valdosta, Georgia, the epicenter of high school football in the South, winning means more than just X's and O's.
There you go. Lock you out. Lock your arms out. There you go.
Are you worth $100,000?
Well, after this year, I would say most of our people would say no. After last year, maybe so. Because all right, Gaines, what you gonna do, man?
Hired in 2016, Valdosta High head football coach Alan Rodemaker joined the six-figure club.
How's a freshman for you?
Rodemaker's $105,000 salary is paid entirely from the school district's general fund and was approved by the district's Board of Education. This is a common practice in Georgia. Valdosta High is the winningest high school football program in America.
I don't know about you, Ivan, but I missed my calling somewhere along the way. I mean, is to stand out there and be a high school football coach for $132,000 a year. That's public money. That's money that could be going to the education of kids. And it could be going to the infrastructure. It could be going to books. It could be going to computers. But instead, it's going to a coach to coach and to create a winning football program. Are we, look, am I just missing something here? Is this really money well spent when you start at the high school ranks, but then you move to the college ranks? In essence, look, I've never been one to say that anybody shouldn't make as much money as they possibly can, because let's face it, from an athlete's standpoint, you've only got a couple of years to make that money. And you got to make it while you can. But are we missing something here in saying, look, if the people want it, if the school districts want it, if the universities want it, if they're willing to pay it and just stop bitching about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is not my priorities. I think it's ridiculous what coaches make at certainly those guys in Georgia. I think what college football coaches making now is appalling, but you can't regulate the marketplace, or if you can, nobody's quite figured out how to do it effectively. The NCAA tried with assistant basketball coaches 30 years ago by restricting a third assistant coach to, I think it was $12,000 or $16,000 a year, and they ended up paying $54 million in damages. Because they got sued for restricting people's income. So if you can figure out how to get around the problem of what the market will bear, then you can figure out how to limit coaching salaries. To your point, it's a question of priorities, and these are what they've set in South Georgia and then what they've set in college football. They're completely skewed, and I would point this out. I think it's very important. If these coaching salaries in colleges had not gotten so big, the outcry about compensating players would not have gotten so big.
Yes.
It got out of balance so much that now people are trying to figure out how to correct it. It's hard to do, to figure out how to do it given how many issues there are, but there is a movement to begin to try, obviously.
Well, it almost seems as if, to me, that the money in high school and college, that drives a lot of what we're talking about here today, and that's the cover-up. Because the cover-up, and to make sure that your players, your coaches, the people involved are kept away and they're kept out of the limelight, and if they break a rule here and there, cover it up, quash it, keep it down, because it still is a money-making machine. And if you pay these tremendous amounts of money at any level, high school or college, and if you've got a player that gets in trouble or a coach who gets in trouble, then that money and that income and that profit margin, if you will, starts to go down because people go, well, maybe I don't want to go, and maybe there's a problem, and here's a coach that does something wrong, and that's my daughter, that's my son, here we go again. So to me, it's you're protecting an investment, albeit it's almost an illegal manner of protecting an investment in many ways. And maybe if you paid a coach $150,000, maybe you wouldn't be that worried about it because you can always go out and get yourself another coach. But when you're paying a guy $6 million, you better protect him because last time I checked, he's got 2 national championships in the box. And that just made us a whole lot more money. It's all, hey, I feel like all of a sudden, Ivan, what I'm doing here is follow the money, no matter how you look at it.
Well, I don't think the $1 million salaries have stopped anybody from firing coaches and paying them off. I mean, the money seems to your point, that if you lessen the salaries, maybe people would become more responsible, or it would be easier to deal with these transgressions. They're firing coaches and handing them 8-figure buyouts.
And well, that's another point too. You're handing them those 8-figure buyouts. You're still paying. I mean, there's another issue that we haven't even talked about. If a guy like Les Miles goes out there and he's found groping girls in a locker room somewhere, and again, I'm just being facetious here. But if something happens there, he's basically broken a rule, broken a law. And here's your money on the way out the door.
I don't.
There.
I guess I don't remember whether LSU paid. I'm sure they must have paid him something when he left, when they fired him. Which is even more astounding, given that they had evidence that they could have fired him with cause. And I have no idea how his contract was structured in that regard. But usually, if you can fire somebody with cause, you don't have to buy him out. So that just makes their decision to withhold that study even more baffling.
Money. One more thing on money. Playoffs. Let's hit that. You and I have not had a chance. I think the last time we talked, there was no. Last time Ivan and I did a show together, I swear there were no playoffs. It was just, here was the Orange Bowl, here was the Cotton Bowl, here was everything else. Wait for the AP and the UPI rankings to come out. That's how long I think it's been since that point. But we have playoffs now, and we have bowl games, and we have all this money. Lou Saban, and we keep coming back to Lou Saban because he's
Nick Saban. Yeah.
Nick Saban. Why did I say Lou Saban? I'm sorry. Thank you. There it is. It's that damn old age again that just gets me in there. Every time I think Saban, I think of Lou Saban. Thank you, Nick Saban. Nick Saban is the guy that most people look at with regard to championships and regard to money and regard to what's happening with all the championships that he has won. 3 years ago, and this was astounding, 3 years ago, he talked about the playoffs and bowl games and how the playoffs were robbing from the bowl games, and maybe the bowl games were being made less because of all the playoffs. Now, I want people to keep in mind when they hear this, this is from ESPN. And only now, as you and I are doing this show, there's a story floating around out there about Nick Saban who's talking about playoffs again and talking about bowl games. He said it 3 years ago.
I think one of the great things about college football is bowl games always gave a lot of teams, fans, programs an opportunity to get a lot of positive self-gratification at the end of the season if you qualified for a bowl game. I think the more playoffs you have, the less significance bowl games have. And I think that those two things eventually are going to have a hard time coexisting. So I think you got to first set the priority of what's more important, having bowl games and a small playoff, a bigger playoff and no bowl games. And I think that's an issue that, you know, somebody needs to resolve. I do think that because of the less significance of bowl games, more and more players will probably choose not to play, like we've started to see now. And I guess if you had more playoffs and the games had more significance, maybe more players would play. I don't know.
Hey, Ivan, isn't this genie long out of the bottle?
Yeah, no. Players started sitting out of bowls 6 years ago for the reasons that Nick explained. And I'm not convinced that if the playoffs were bigger, to his point, I'm not convinced that if the playoffs were bigger that it would stop players from sitting out. I mean, we had guys just stop in the middle of basketball season this year. You know, they just decided they were done. You know, it happened at Pitt. It happened at other places. So, you know, that's out of, you know, that's a different issue than playoffs and bowls. Of course, that speaks to players looking out for themselves over looking out for the common goal of a team and a competitive sport. I think Nick has, as he usually has been on to something regarding the future of the bowl business. And you couldn't create the bowl system, you know, from scratch. It didn't start out to be a postseason in terms of naming a champion. It started out, as Nick said, as a reward and as a tourist attraction. And it was put in a role of serving as a postseason in a competitive environment. It didn't fit very well. It doesn't fit very well. And if the playoff gets bigger, which it's going to because of the need for money, the bowls are going to suffer. And the only reason that they may not is if for instance, my former employer needs programming and they decide that the cost of staging a bowl is worth paying for, which is the case with a lot of those bowls now.
Are bowl games even really worth it anymore?
Well, worth what? I mean, they're worth it for, coaches and players that want to play in them. They're worth it for those of us who love the idea that from mid-December to the first week in January, there's a college football game on every friggin' day. Who doesn't love that? But yeah, it's what is your worth? How are you determining worth? And if it's the traditional bowl worth of a tourist attraction that rewards, colleges and everybody goes to visit, wherever it is they're going to play, that model has pretty well reached its expiration date. Sure.
Are we going to? I mean, is 16 the end all be all for a playoff? It seems as if you and I both know. Hey, look, I remember the conversations we had. At first, it was two teams, and then it was 4, and then it's 8. Now it's 16. Hell, just blow it up and go 24.
Well, sure. I mean, the minute they go to 8 or whatever their next step is, then somebody, within 2 or 3 days will say, well, why not 16? I mean, that's just the nature of it. I think they're scared to death, Ed, that the expansion of the playoff will come at the expense of the attraction of the regular season. The unique qualities of a college football regular season where games in September are vitally important to what happens in January is something that the powers that be in college athletics are really loath to let go of. And it might be, they probably will do it because of the clamor for more playoff games and for more teams to make the postseason. And I will admit, this year it was the first time I ever really began to think, 4 is not enough, and we're seeing Alabama and Clemson and Oklahoma and Notre Dame, every year in Ohio State. It's those 5 for the last 3 or 4 years, and everybody's bored with it. I don't know that 8 is really going to answer that. I don't know that 8's really going to answer that because, what happens in a SEC championship game when, number 1 Alabama is playing number 6 Florida, and or number 1 Alabama is playing number 2 Florida. Why are they going to play the SEC championship game? What good is that? When the playoffs begin the next week. I mean, to what end? And
I think you hit it though. It's as soon as when it's 8, it'll be okay. We're bored with 8, and the other thing will be okay. But what about the 9th team? Oh, wait a minute. That team right there, a 9, that should have been in there. And then the 10th team. That's how it started before. And
we do that with the 69th team in college basketball.
Yes.
We're always going to do that. That's why you and I have jobs. I mean, that part's fun.
It's true, though, because it just can't ever be enough. It'll be 128 teams, and somebody will go, isn't there a team somewhere in Montana that went 18-0 somewhere and should be in
New
these
Mexico
playoffs?
State got robbed. Yeah.
Well, and you and I both know that the college football playoff system will propagate and will continue to grow as long as there's a network or networks willing to put it on the air. As you said, your former employer, number 1, stop right there. But the most important thing is, as long as you've got that big moneyed sponsor that's sitting there and says, I'm going to throw you $10 million to put on a football game. Hell, they'll put one on in Juneau, Alaska, at 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. If you'll pay me $10 million and cough it up, they don't care. I mean, it's those two things. And as long as you get that, this conversation will never be over.
No, I mean, and they've made it clear for a while that they're going to do what brings in the most money, and that's that may sound antithetical to what college athletics is supposed to be, but it's supposed to be. But it's been that way for a long time, and it's not going to change.
It's supposed to be. I think was the key phrase. Is all it is in there.
Yeah,
it has been a tough year for everybody. I mean, as we're doing this show, we're just past the 1-year anniversary of when America shut down because of COVID-19, and our sports and our lives, and things will never be the same. I'm curious from your perspective, because here we are, 2 sports guys. This is how we make our living. And we had nothing. And I don't know about you, but I got a little tired of looking at the studio walls for a while. I wanted to tear these speakers down. I just wanted to rip everything. I wanted to burn it down after a while. What's it been like for you and your family during this year?
Well, we've been in the same rut that everybody else has been in. I was thinking this morning back to last summer when all you wanted to do was find a mask. It was hard to get a mask. You hoped that we'd get to the point where there would be a vaccine, but you didn't think that we'd have the possibility, as President Biden said, of getting back to some sense of normalcy by July 4th of this year. I mean, I certainly didn't think that, but I'm getting my first shot tomorrow, and I'm really excited about it. And I think, exactly. And
Bravo.
I think as much reluctance as there has been initially about the vaccine, I think as people are seeing, the numbers go down, and they're seeing their neighbors get the shot and they don't have it yet, I think more people are coming around to it. But, that's far afield of the question you asked me. There was so much uncertainty about what was going to happen to sports. And I think the sports at all levels deserves an immense amount of credit for staging what they could in the best way they could. I was less, I was less enraptured by sports over the last year, which might speak to the lack of crowds. It might speak to the off timing of everything, the Derby and the Masters in the fall and the Stanley Cup, whenever it was played. And, it didn't feel like it was normal. It didn't feel like it was supposed to feel. And I was less interested in it. College football had the advantage of being played when it was supposed to be played. And they got to play a lot of games, but they didn't get to play every game, far from it. So we all adjusted because that was the best we could do. That was the best we could get, and we were happy to have it. Now schools are beginning to say they expect to have full stadiums in the fall, and I hope they're right. It's nice to think about. We'll see when we get there.
I also want to make sure that we talk about Max, because you're in the process of putting the final touches on a book as we speak, which is going to come out here later in 2021. The book is called I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye, and it's about your son, Max, who took his own life. And it is a conversation that is a difficult one to have, but it needs to be had because it certainly affects so many people. It has touched so many lives. Suicide has touched my life with friends of mine, people that I know. And there's many times that people don't want to talk. It is one of those things where they go, shh, don't talk. Just let it go. But you, as a brilliant writer, and having the opportunity to talk about it, what has it been like for you in the process of putting this book together and at the same time making sure that you pay the proper homage to Max in his life?
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking. Thank you for saying that. Ed, I think I waited 5 years to write the book because I needed the perspective and I needed the time. I wasn't ready to, before that time, I wasn't ready to put myself out there, not so much put myself out there, but it just felt, it was a little raw. And I started to think last year, and you asked me about the pandemic. I had a lot of time to think last year because there wasn't a lot to cover. And I began to think if I don't write something now, it's going to begin to slip away. So it was just, I found myself in a sweet spot to say what I wanted to say. And to your point about people not wanting to talk about suicide, I think those of us who have survived family members or close loved ones who have ended their own lives have the not only freedom to talk about it, an obligation. I think you don't talk about it because of the, I don't know whether it's, it's not considered, conversation for polite company or whatever. Look, the way I look at it is, whatever if people are offended that I'm talking about this in public, or whatever opprobrium comes my way because I'm talking about it in public, doesn't begin to approach, the pain of losing a son. And so, whatever you want to say to me about the fact that I'm talking about this in public, I don't care. I think I found it helpful that people talk to me. I think it will help a lot of people if we can get this conversation out into the open, not only people who are suffering from mental illness, but the people who love the people who are suffering from mental illness. And if we can get that conversation out there, and I love the way I describe it, Ed, is I'm not an expert on mental illness. I'm an expert on one case of mental illness. And I think if I can just tell my story and tell who Max was, he was so much more than the last act he took. I think it'll help people.
I think you used a word in there that people need to hear, and that's obligation. Because we do have that obligation. We are the only people left to be able to tell the story of who the person was. Otherwise, they simply are words on a piece of paper, or audio on a podcast, or video on YouTube somewhere. And if we don't tell their story, it fades. And
well, sure, yeah, and
that's the worst thing that can happen.
Well, it is, and I think you have to, one of the issues and the reasons you want to talk about whoever you lost is that you have to go on without them. You can't stay back where they left you. You know, you have to continue to live your life, and you have to continue to, if you don't enjoy the good things that continue to happen to you after such a bad thing happened, then you lose again. So I think in that sense, you just try to bring the one you lost with you as best you can. I would say this along the same lines, Ed. A big motivation for me in writing the book had to do with my realization that the grief I felt and the pain I felt while grieving was really just the love I had for my son in a different form. And once I sort of made that connection in my head, I understood. The pain lessened because I understood what it was. And people are so scared of grief, and they're so scared of the grieving and what to say to them, that I part of what I talk about in the book is just that grief is really just a form of love, and also to try to encourage people to talk to those who are grieving and not shy away from them, and not be scared to talk to them. You know, we want to talk about who we lost. You know, that to your point about keeping, for lack of a better phrase, keeping them alive. If I don't talk about Max, who is? And so I want you to ask me questions about him. I want to talk about him. You know, it still hurts. It's always going to hurt. You know, time helps in that regard, but sure, he's my kid. I want to talk about him.
It's funny. My mom passed away in December, and I still have what you said is true. Grief is a way of love because it still is there. You said it was so true. When someone asks about her, I love that because it lets me dig back. It lets me tell a story, lets me remember something. So it's all very true. I'm going to lose it here in a minute myself. When's the book coming out?
Book will be out in October. We are, just going through the editing process now, or at the tail end of the editing process, and I'm just gonna, I've still got a few things to do with it, and then I'll, start trying to market it.
Well, this forum is open for you. I hope that our getting back together again means we talk much more.
That'd be great.
You have an open forum at any time, and an open invitation to come on and talk about Max. And when that comes around, we're going to sit here and we're going to tell stories. And I want people to make sure that they buy the book with love in learning about him. I think it's a marvelous thing. So
thank you.
You got me. You got us both. I mean, it's true about the love factor. I want to remind everybody. Ivan, and I'm going to say this in front of him. I've said it before on radio before, never on TV. He is a brilliant writer. Nobody knows college football better. I don't care. I think I've read his stuff for years and years, and know it very well. Get a hold of him on social media. Twitter, it's at Ivan_Maisel. On Facebook, it's at Ivan.Maisel. And on Instagram, it's at Ivan_Maisel. You can follow all of his adventures there and more about college football as well. A great pleasure, my friend. I cannot thank you enough. Please, let's do this again.
Thank you, Ed.
My best to you and your family. And please, let's not have another year like we just had.
Boy, ain't that the truth.
I'm actually looking forward to a little college football. Although, thank goodness my hockey's back. So I'm living a little that way. Ivan, thanks so much. Best to the family.
Thank you, Ed.
All right. Ivan Maisel, great friend and one of the great writers. Don't forget, you can catch up with him, catch up with us, see all of our episodes on welcometothearena.com and all of our shows. Don't forget, on all the major podcast platforms, just look for Ed Berliner and the Man in the Arena. For Ivan Maisel, myself, the entire crew here, I'm Ed Berliner. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. Until we meet again, rock on, true believers. See ya!
You're still here?
Are you not entertained?
It's over.
All right, hey. All right, good job, guys. Let's just not come in tomorrow. Let's just take a day.
Go home.
I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Go.
That's all, folks.